Welcome to this initial presentation for EAL 501 Educational Professionalism, the first unit in the Graduate Certificate in Education Applied Learning. The presentation will outline for you the key design features of the unit and how you can best utilise them to maximise your learning. The first slide lists the intended learning outcomes for this unit. There are what we and you expect to be able to do at the end of the 13 weeks of the semester. They're important for me as a lecturer because they are where I started this unit build. Before anything, I had to decide the unit objectives. At that time they were draft and they have been modified since to the final refined form you see before you. These learning outcomes are where you also should start the unit. Although they are in the unit outline, it can be easy to overlook them ahead of all of the other bits that concern students, such as assessment. Because you are education students, it's professionally important that you know the logic behind what I'm doing here. The term constructive alignment was developed by John Biggs, a Tasmanian and University of Tasmania graduate. The concept is not rocket science and thus elegant in its simplicity and application. Biggs argues that for education to work, the intended learning outcomes, assessment, and teaching and learning activities need to be mutually self-supporting, just like a tripod. It's no use assessing something that hasn't been taught or that's outside the scope of the unit. Similarly, introducing topics that have nothing to do with the outcomes or assessment just doesn't make sense. The term used for the latter is curriculum drift. This is where lecturers take the opportunity to inject their favourite topic into units because it's a favourite, they know about it, and they want to push their own barrow. This applies not just to university studies. It's like putting short crust pastry assessment into a lesson series on soups, or retaining wall construction techniques into a unit that is testing concrete pouring skills. In a vet context, the weirdness can stick out like a sore thumb. In a uni setting, it's when students ask, why are we listening to this lecture? Or when students put into evaluations that the assessment task had nothing to do with the unit. I find the best way to think of constructive alignment is as a three-legged stool. If just one leg is weak, the stool collapses and we end up on our bums. The stool needs all three legs to be able to do its job. The rather small screenshot you see before you is of a tool I have developed called UMAP. Essentially, it lays out all the key elements of a unit, from intended learning outcomes, through assessment tasks, learning activities, professional teaching standards, and Australian Qualifications Framework outcomes. You don't have to be across the detail, although the UMAP will appear in the units shortly after this presentation. You'll find the link when you go back in, having watched the presentation itself. However, it should illustrate to you that constructive alignment has actively been applied to the development of this brand new unit, EAL 501. Consequently, all the bits should fit together. As postgraduates and teachers, you should be critical audiences and consider whether this is so. If not, you should tell us. There's nothing worse than finding out after the unit that something hasn't worked. We prefer to get right onto it. In this case, I've made the best efforts to ensure that the unit is aligned and makes sense for both me and for you. But it's a new unit, and your advice on tweaking should help make it better. In a highly abbreviated format, this slide shows that learning outcomes 1, 2, 3 and 4 are assessed through your reflective journal analysis. This is assessed through an ePortfolio webfolio where a targeted reflection analyses your reflective journal and connects it to your postings to the discussion boards. The Module 1 teaching and learning activities develop your understanding of the reflective framework necessary to build the assessment. Most specifically, the assessment task demands that you actively and effectively engage with the readings and the discussion boards in the development of your understanding of professional reflection. The assessment task can't be completed unless I and anyone else can see your engagement with the readings and sharing ideas and questions with your colleagues. If I just assessed a reflection in isolation, it could be whipped up without doing the specified learning and might well be monodimensional and of little advancement to the benefit of your professional experience. If the learning task is to matter, and that's what is at the heart of the unit, not the assessment, then we should see it happening. In this sense, the constructive alignment applies to you as students, the same as it applies to me as a lecturer and unit designer. The next step after looking at the learning outcomes is to check the assessment. In this case, the Task 1 plain English file in the assessments folder. This can be matched up against the schedule and objectives in the module. If you can make sense of the assessment task and bring it together with the learning outcomes, then you're in a position to actually get on into the topics. And through active engagement with the discussions, either on the boards or in web rooms, contribute to the achievement of the assessment. But before heading off too quickly, get hold of the rubric, get familiar with it, and keep it by you as you progress through the learning activities and start orienting towards the assessment. The assessment criteria align with the unit intended learning outcomes, whilst the descriptors in the rubric link in the learning activities. With constructive alignment, we want you to appreciate that you should know the outcomes, understand and take ownership of the assessment, and engage with the learning activities to construct your learning. These 3 bits, we're looking for to make those legs strong and even, so that your learning, just like the stool, is well balanced and strong.